The message appeared on her screen for only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. A name that wasn't mine. Words that should have been meant for me. I froze with my hand halfway extended toward her, a glass of wine suspended in midair as the world around me slowed to an excruciating crawl. Rain hammered against our windows, the Tuesday evening storm matching the sudden turbulence in my chest. Megan didn't notice me standing there. She was too absorbed in her phone, fingers dancing across the screen, her face illuminated by the blue glow that made her look like she existed in another dimension entirely. The sound she made, a soft, genuine laugh, pierced me deeper than any knife could. That laugh was once reserved for me. Now it belonged to someone named Adam. What's so funny? I asked, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake beneath my ribs. Megan startled, quickly turning her phone face down on the couch cushion. Just a meme Karen sent from work, she said, her smile fading into something rehearsed and hollow. I knew Karen from her office. They barely spoke outside of mandatory meetings. Must have been hilarious, I said, placing the wine glass on the coffee table and sitting beside her. Not too close, not anymore. When had that happened? When had we started leaving space between us on our own couch? You know Karen, she replied with a dismissive wave. I didn't, not really. And I was beginning to wonder if I knew Megan anymore either. We met during a thunderstorm much like this one 5 years ago. The bookstore had been nearly empty, both of us taking shelter from the downpour. Our fingers touched reaching for the same dog-eared copy of The Great Gatsby. We joked about fate and literary cliches while the storm raged outside. We met in a storm, I sometimes whispered to her on rainy nights like this one, and we'll weather every storm together. Now, I stared at her profile as she pretended to watch the documentary playing on TV. We met in a storm and now a storm was tearing us apart. I'm going to grab some snacks, Megan announced, rising from the couch. Her phone remained behind, face down on the cushion. A test? A mistake? My hand hovered over it as I heard her opening cabinets in the kitchen. I shouldn't. I wouldn't. But then her phone lit up with a new notification, the screen briefly visible before darkening again. Adam, miss you already? Tuesday meetings aren't the same without you sneaking glances at me across the table. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't inflicted by what people say to your face, but by what you see when they don't know you're looking. Trust is like a pendulum. It swings from absolute faith to painful suspicion in a single moment, with one glimpse at a message not meant for your eyes. My fingers trembled as I set the phone back exactly as she'd left it. The pendulum had swung. Megan returned with a bowl of popcorn, settling back into her spot. What did I miss? She asked, nodding toward the TV where a pride of lions stalked the savannah. Everything, I wanted to say. Instead I shrugged. Nothing important. Sometimes you need to step back to see the full picture. I wouldn't confront her, not yet. I would watch and wait, collect the pieces of our fractured reality until I understood the shape of her deception. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the roof like an urgent warning. Megan's phone buzzed again, and this time she snatched it up quickly, angling the screen away from me. Work stuff, she muttered, thumbs typing rapidly. The Chicago project is falling apart. Chicago. A new piece clicked into place. Her upcoming business trip to Chicago next week. The way she'd been vague about the details, defensive when I asked innocent questions. Later that night, I watched her sleeping form in our bed, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the peaceful expression on her face. How can someone look so innocent while harboring such secrets? How well do we truly know the people we share our pillows with? The distance between us in that bed might as well have been an ocean. Megan had become like an island slowly drifting away from the mainland of our marriage. I could still see her shoreline, but the current pulling her away grew stronger each day. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the paint as rain continued to assault our windows. Tomorrow I would begin watching more carefully. Tomorrow I would start searching for more cracks in the perfect life I thought we had built. The storm outside had nothing on the tempest brewing inside me. Over the next few days I found myself transforming into someone I barely recognized, a detective in my own home, piecing together a puzzle whose picture I dreaded seeing completed. Patterns emerged in Megan's behavior like constellations once you know where to look. The way she angled her phone away from me, how she excused herself to take calls in another room, her sudden interest in working late at the office. Our marriage had become a compass that no longer pointed north. We moved around each other in choreographed avoidance, actors playing at domesticity without the conviction required for a believable performance. I need to talk to you about something, Megan said one evening, settling beside me on the couch with deliberate casualness. I noticed how she'd taken extra care with her appearance that morning, the outfit she wore when she wanted to feel confident. "I'm listening," I replied, muting the television. "I've been asked to extend my trip to Chicago next week. The project needs more hands-on attention than we expected." Her voice had the practiced cadence of rehearsed lines, a slight tremor beneath the professional veneer. "How long?" 5 days instead of 3. She examined her fingernails, a tell I'd learned to recognize years ago. "It's an opportunity to show the executive team what I can do." I studied her as a naturalist might observe a rare species, cataloging behaviors without interference. "Is anyone I know going with you?" Her eyes flickered up, then away, an actor forgetting their mark. "Just colleagues, you don't know them." "Must be exciting," I offered, voice neutral. "Important project." "Very important," she agreed too quickly, relief evident in the loosening of her shoulders. Later that night, the comparison struck me with brutal clarity. I was like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense, interacting with a ghost without realizing it. The Megan I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by someone wearing her face but speaking lines from a different script. My opportunity came Thursday evening when Megan forgot her tablet on the nightstand before stepping into the shower. The bedroom was dark except for the glow of the device, like the light at the bottom of a well, beckoning, dangerous, revealing truths hidden in shadows. The sound of running water masked my movements as I picked up the tablet. I hesitated only briefly before entering her password, her mother's birthday, unchanged since we'd started dating. The irony that she'd been careless with this small detail while constructing elaborate lies wasn't lost on me. I found what I was looking for in her video folder, labeled with such obvious transparency that I'd laugh if my throat weren't constricted with dread. Chicago. 2022. The truth had been hidden under the most evident name, like Edgar Allan Poe's purloined letter, concealed in plain sight. My finger hovered over the play button, hesitation gripping me. This was a Pandora's box moment. Once opened, there would be no returning to blissful ignorance. The shower continued running in the background, a countdown timer to my decision. I pressed play. What followed was a hotel room I didn't recognize, a laughing Megan I barely knew, and a man whose face confirmed every suspicion I'd been cultivating. Adam. Not an imagined threat but a flesh-and-blood person who kissed my wife with the familiarity of established intimacy. The video wasn't long, just over 2 minutes, but it altered my reality as completely as if gravity had suddenly reversed direction. My stomach dropped as I watched them together, her genuine laughter, the kind I hadn't heard directed at me in months, filling the hotel room. I sat motionless after it ended, the tablet screen growing dark in my hands. The shower stopped and I could hear Megan humming, actually humming, as she dried off. With a deliberate calm that surprised even me, I reopened the video and left it paused on the most incriminating frame. Megan in Adam's arms, both of them smiling at the camera they'd propped up, their private documentary of betrayal. I placed the tablet on her pillow like a calling card from reality, an invitation to stop pretending. Then I grabbed my keys and left the bedroom. Megan's voice followed me down the hallway. "Josh? Where are you going?" I didn't answer. What could I possibly say that would matter more than what I'd just seen? The front door closed behind me with a decisive click, the sound of one life ending and another uncertain one beginning. As I started my car and pulled away from our house, no longer a home, I realized that sometimes truth doesn't set you free immediately. Sometimes it first shows you the bars of the cage you've been living in. The headlights of oncoming cars sliced through the darkness like searchlights, illuminating my new reality in harsh, intermittent flashes. I drove without destination, the city sprawling around me in a labyrinth of neon and shadows. Rain had started again, streaking across my windshield in chaotic patterns that matched my scattered thoughts. I found myself laughing, a hollow, brittle sound that filled the car. It was the laugh of a man who just realized he'd been living in a simulation. Like Neo in The Matrix, I had swallowed the red pill and now I was seeing how deep the rabbit hole truly went. The digital clock on my dashboard read 2:15 in the morning when I finally pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Moon Motel. The flickering vacancy sign cast an eerie blue glow across the rain-slicked asphalt, a fitting symbol for my temporary transitional life. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and decades of strangers. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone as it vibrated with incoming messages from Megan. Each notification was like a raindrop in a storm of lies. "Josh, please come home. This isn't what you think. We need to talk about this. Answer me, please." I turned the phone off and lay back on the stiff mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. They formed a map of an unknown country, the territory of my future that I would now have to navigate alone. Sleep evaded me. When morning came, I turned my phone back on to a fresh barrage of messages and 7 missed calls. The final text simply read, "I'm sorry. Call me when you're ready to talk." I wasn't ready. But I knew the conversation was inevitable. When I finally called, her voice answered on the first ring. "Josh," she breathed, a perfect performance of relief. "Where are you? Are you okay? Does it matter where I am?" The calm in my voice surprised me. "Of course it matters. I've been worried sick. What you saw, it's not what you think." A bitter laugh escaped me. "What exactly do I think, Megan? Please tell me my own thoughts because you've always known what's happening in my head better than I do." "Josh, please." "How long?" I interrupted. "How long has it been going on with Adam?" The pause told me everything before she even spoke. "It's complicated." "I'm sure it is. Betrayal usually comes with complications." "You've been so distant," she said, her voice shifting from apology to accusation with practiced ease. "I needed someone who was actually present. Who saw me. So it's my fault?" The detective in me noted this predictable turn, the transformation of perpetrator into victim. Fascinating how my alleged emotional distance justifies physical intimacy with a colleague. "That's not what I'm saying," Megan protested, but we both heard the hollow ring of her words. "You're not admitting guilt, Megan. You're just repackaging it." I thought of the politicians I watched on TV, twisting facts into pretzels of alternative truth. What else should I know? Is Adam the only one? Another telling silence. "I see," I said, though I felt blind, groping through a house I thought I knew, suddenly finding walls where doorways should be. "I made mistakes," she admitted, "but I never stopped loving you." The words bounced off me like raindrops off a window. Love doesn't look like what I saw in that video. After hanging up, I drove to my parents' house. My father, a retired judge, listened without interruption as I explained the situation over coffee at their kitchen table. "In the war of truth," he finally said, setting down his mug, "your weapons are facts, not emotions. Remember that when things get ugly." "You think they will?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Son, I've presided over hundreds of divorces. When infidelity is involved, things always get ugly." As I left their house, I felt as though I'd crossed an invisible line, from the before into the after of my life, with no possibility of return. The sky had cleared, sunlight gleaming off the wet streets, but the brightness felt like a mockery. Back at the Blue Moon, I researched divorce attorneys on my laptop. Each click, each note I took was another step away from the man I had been just days ago. Trusting, oblivious, content in my ignorance. I chose to text rather than call Megan. "I won't be home tonight. I need space to think." Her reply came quickly. "I canceled Chicago. We can fix this, Josh. Please give me a chance to explain." But some things once broken can't be repaired, only acknowledged as permanently changed. Like a fish suddenly aware of water only when yanked onto shore, I was gasping in my new atmosphere of truth, painful as it was to breathe. The cafe was aptly named The Scales, with its logo of balanced dishes hanging above the entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early for my meeting with Martin Wheeler, the divorce attorney my father had recommended. As I waited, I watched rain droplets race down the window beside my table, making bets with myself about which would reach the bottom first, a childish distraction from the adult chaos my life had become. Martin arrived precisely on time, a man whose silver-streaked hair and immaculate suit projected the confidence I desperately needed to borrow. "You look exactly like your father did 20 years ago," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Same eyes. Observant. Careful." I managed a weak smile. "Dad says you're the best." "I'm thorough," Martin corrected, opening his leather portfolio. "Now tell me everything." I recounted the discovery of the messages, the video, Megan's attempts at manipulation, laying out the evidence like exhibits in a courtroom. Martin listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he looked up with the measured expression of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "The video is significant," he said. "But we need to be strategic about when and how we use it." "What do you mean? Isn't it proof?" "It's your queen on the chessboard, Josh. If you move it too early, you lose its power." He leaned forward. "She'll be preparing her own narrative. People rarely admit to being the villain in their own story." As if summoned by his prediction, my phone buzzed with messages from 3 different friends. "Hey man, is everything okay with you and Megan? She sounds pretty upset." "Josh, call me. Megan's telling people some concerning things." "Dude, what happened?" "Megan says you completely overreacted to something." I showed the messages to Martin, whose expression didn't change. "And so it begins," he said. "Her version is spreading like a virus through your social circle. What's she saying about me? It doesn't matter yet. What matters is that she's controlling the narrative." He tapped his pen against his notepad. "It's straight from Orwell. History is written by those who tell it first." I felt sick. "She's turning this around on me, isn't she?" Martin nodded. "Classic strategy. In her version she made a mistake, but your reaction is the real problem." That evening I met my friend Jake at a bar across town. Jake had known both of us since before we were married, one of the few friends I could trust to be neutral. "She's playing the victim card hard," Jake said, nursing his beer. "According to Megan's lunch with Sarah yesterday, you've been emotionally unavailable for months, and when she tried to talk to you about it, you exploded and abandoned her." "That's not what happened," I said, anger rising like bile. "I know," Jake replied, his eyes meeting mine. "She's always been like this, Josh. You just saw what you wanted to see." "What do you mean?" Jake hesitated. "Remember that New Year's party 3 years ago? How she flirted with my boss right in front of you, then somehow convinced everyone you were being irrationally jealous." The memory hit me with new clarity, Megan laughing too loudly at his jokes, touching his arm, then later dismissing my concerns as paranoia. Friends had taken her side, suggesting I needed to be more secure. "I should have seen it then," I murmured. "We see what we're ready to see," Jake said simply. When I returned to my motel room, a new email from Megan awaited me, a photo of us on our honeymoon in Santorini, standing against the backdrop of a blazing sunset. No message, just the image. Nostalgia manipulation, emotional blackmail disguised as a sweet memory. I closed my laptop and turned on the television, finding a documentary about narcissistic personality patterns. The clinical descriptions of manipulation tactics, gaslighting and victim playing were so familiar I nearly laughed. The wolf had been wearing sheep's clothing all along, but now she draped herself in victim's garb. Martin's words from our meeting echoed. "In chess, you don't win by reacting to every move your opponent makes. You win by forcing them to react to yours." That night, I drafted a meticulous account of everything I'd learned, everything I'd seen. Not as a weapon but as armor against the revised history Megan was creating. Tomorrow, I would need to return home briefly to collect more clothes and documents. The thought of seeing her, the actress who had played my loving wife, made my stomach clench. As I finally drifted toward sleep, my phone lit up with one final message from Megan. "I miss you. Please come home so we can talk this through." I turned the phone face down without responding. Some conversations could only happen through lawyers now. The chess game had begun and I couldn't afford to make emotional moves. I didn't need to see Megan's social media posts to know they existed. The concerned texts from peripheral friends told me everything. She had taken her performance to a larger stage. "Have you seen what Megan posted?" My cousin Emily's voice crackled through my phone speaker as I stood in the motel parking lot, morning coffee cooling in my hand. "I haven't looked," I admitted. "Josh, she's created this whole narrative. Photos of your empty closet, captions about abandoned without warning. People are flooding her comments with support." A knot tightened in my stomach. "I'm not surprised." "You should look," Emily insisted. "Know what you're dealing with." Later, in my motel room, I finally opened Instagram. Megan's profile appeared carefully curated, a visual story of abandonment and resilience. The most recent photo showed her sitting forlornly at our dining table, an empty chair across from her. The caption read, "Some absences speak louder than words ever could." The comments section overflowed with sympathy. "Stay strong, hon, you deserve better. Men don't know how to communicate. They just leave. You're handling this with such grace. Proud of you." Each commenter judging a situation they knew nothing about, delivering verdicts without seeing evidence. The court of public opinion needed no facts, only compelling performance. My phone rang. Rachel, a PR specialist I'd worked with on a company event last year. "Josh, I don't know if you remember me, but I felt I needed to call." Her voice was hesitant. "I've seen what Megan's posting and it seems like a deliberate campaign." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. "She's not just complaining, Josh. She's building a narrative." Rachel paused. "She's telling people you were controlling, that you monitored her movements and isolated her from friends." My laugh was hollow. Controlling? I didn't even check her phone until I saw that message flash on her screen. If I'd been more suspicious, maybe I wouldn't have been blindsided. This is a classic strategy, accuse the victim first. She's getting ahead of you, flipping the script. Rachel's professional analysis confirmed what I was seeing. She's turning your legitimate reaction into proof of her allegations. I thought of chess again. Megan had made an unexpected knight's move, changing the rules of our game. At the grocery store that evening, I felt eyes on me, judgment from a woman I recognized as a member of Megan's book club. She quickly looked away when I noticed her stare. My cropped-out face on her Instagram has become the silent witness to my supposed guilt, I told Martin during our next meeting. How do I fight this? You don't, not directly, Martin cautioned. She's creating smoke to hide the fire of her own infidelity. Engaging with it just feeds the flames. So I just sit back while she destroys my reputation? She's creating a diversion, Josh. A smokescreen to hide her own betrayal. He tapped his pen on the table. Give her enough rope. That evening, Jake called with new information. Adam's been put on administrative leave, he said without preamble. Apparently, his affair with a married colleague violated company ethics policies. I felt a strange absence of satisfaction. Does Megan know? All she knows. She's spinning it as another example of your vindictiveness. Claims you contacted his boss to ruin his career. I didn't, I said, though the thought had crossed my mind. Doesn't matter. In her world, you did. The moral boundaries I'd always tried to maintain were growing hazy. When cornered, even principled people could contemplate actions they once considered beneath them. I thought of The Count of Monte Cristo. How sometimes the best revenge was simply to bring truth into the light. But how to do that without stooping to Megan's level? Rachel called again the next morning. She's escalating, Josh. The victim narrative is gaining traction. Her voice held professional concern. If you want to counter this, we need a strategy. I'm not going to play her game, I insisted. This isn't about games. It's about protecting yourself. She paused. Your silence is being read as guilt. After hanging up, I stared at my reflection in the motel bathroom mirror. I barely recognized the man looking back, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, jaw tight with unspoken words. I would not be a silent target in her shooting gallery any longer. I drafted a simple statement, editing it repeatedly until every word was precise, factual, unemotional. No accusations, just truth. I would include the video, not out of vengeance, but as evidence against the false reality Megan was constructing. My finger hovered over the post button on my dormant social media account. This would change everything, making private pain irrevocably public. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, Jake had said. I pressed post, and watched as the truth began its journey into the world. Midnight found me hunched over my laptop in the eerie blue glow of the motel room, crafting what felt like the most important document of my life. Each word was chosen with surgical precision, each sentence constructed to reveal truth without emotional manipulation. I was not writing to attack Megan, but to defend myself against the fictional character she had created in my name. Like a surgeon preparing for an operation, I selected each word with the precision of a scalpel, I whispered to myself, reviewing the text one final time before attaching the video file. My post read, "For those concerned about recent statements regarding my marriage, I've remained silent until now out of respect for privacy. However, as false narratives continue to spread, I feel compelled to share the truth. 3 weeks ago, I discovered my wife's ongoing affair with her colleague. The attached video, filmed by them in Chicago, provides context for my decision to leave our home. I didn't abandon anyone. I removed myself from a situation that had become untenable through no action of mine. I ask for space and understanding as I navigate this painful time. This will be my only statement on the matter." My finger trembled over the publish button like a sniper's on a trigger. This action couldn't be undone. It would irrevocably change the landscape of my life, Megan's life, and the lives of others caught in our orbit. I clicked. The spark of truth fell onto the gunpowder of social media, and the explosion was immediate. Within minutes, notifications began flooding my screen. Expressions of shock, support, and stunned disbelief from friends and acquaintances alike. "Oh my God, Josh. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I knew something wasn't adding up with her story. Stay strong, man. This is heartbreaking. Take care of yourself. But there were others too. You didn't have to take this public. Shame on you. 2 wrongs don't make a right. This is disgusting. Nobody comes out looking good here." The court of public opinion was in session, and witnesses were being called to testify through likes, shares, and angry face emojis. I closed my laptop, unable to watch as the jury deliberated. The evidence was there now, the video of Megan and Adam serving as the prosecution's star witness. My phone buzzed. "Jake." "Holy shit," he said when I answered. "You actually did it." Does it make me as bad as her? The question had been gnawing at me. No, he said firmly. She started this public spectacle. You just provided the evidence her version conveniently omitted. Sleep evaded me that night. I paced the narrow confines of my motel room like a caged animal, alternating between vindication and regret. By morning, my post had spread far beyond my immediate circle, the wildfire nature of scandal ensuring it reached people I barely knew. Megan's response came before dawn, an emotional post that reframed everything. Yes, I made a mistake. I'm not perfect. But Josh is using our private moments to publicly destroy me. Who's the cruel one? He could have confronted me privately, worked through this with a counselor. Instead, he chose public humiliation. My poor judgment in a moment of weakness doesn't justify this level of vengeful exposure. For those who know me, the real me, thank you for your continued support during this nightmare. Reading her words, I marveled at her ability to pirouette away from accountability, transforming herself from perpetrator to persecuted with a few carefully constructed sentences. Jake called again mid-morning. You've started a chain reaction, he said, an odd note in his voice. Adam's wife found the video. Apparently, she stormed into his office and created a scene. Security had to escort her out. I didn't mean to drag others into this, I said, guilt nibbling at the edges of my resolve. They aren't bystanders, Josh. Adam is as guilty as Megan. Later that day, a message appeared from a name I didn't recognize, Catherine Wilson. Josh, you don't know me. I'm Adam's wife. Or soon-to-be ex-wife. I wanted to thank you for having the courage to post what you did. I've spent months feeling crazy, knowing something was wrong but being told I was paranoid. We're members of a club neither of us wanted to join. I stared at her message for a long time before responding. I'm sorry we had to meet this way. As evening fell, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, contemplating the ripple effects of one moment of truth. Like a butterfly's wings creating a hurricane, my single action had generated storms in the lives of strangers. Truth, once released, was like floodwater, impossible to control or direct. Martin called with an update, his voice unusually grave. The video changes our strategy, he said. Megan's attorney reached out. They want to discuss settlement terms. Already? The public exposure has weakened their position considerably. He paused. But there's something else. We've received an anonymous tip with information that suggests Megan's affair with Adam wasn't her first indiscretion. I closed my eyes, suddenly very tired. How much deeper did this rabbit hole go? Martin's voice on the phone had the somber tone of a doctor about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone pressed to my ear, watching dust particles dance in the shaft of afternoon sunlight cutting through the half-drawn curtains. I received a package this morning, he said. No return address, just your name as the intended recipient. What's in it? I asked, though some part of me already knew. More evidence, more betrayal, more confirmation that the woman I married had been a skilled performance rather than a person. Documents, Josh. And photographs. Martin paused. Dating back nearly 3 years. My breath caught. Before Adam? Well before Adam. His voice softened slightly. Do you want me to summarize or would you prefer to come see for yourself? An hour later, I sat in Martin's office, a manila folder open before me. The evidence lay spread across his mahogany desk like artifacts from an archaeological dig, uncovering layers of deception I'd been living upon without knowing. Who sent this? I asked, my voice hollow. The sender used the pseudonym Truth. Martin tapped the unsigned note that had accompanied the package. But they clearly have intimate knowledge of Megan's activities. Email printouts. Hotel receipts. Photographs that turned my stomach. The archaeological metaphor felt increasingly apt. Each new layer revealed older artifacts of betrayal, stretching back further than I had imagined possible. This one, Martin said, pointing to a receipt, predates Adam by at least a year. I recognized the name on the credit card statement. Michael Peters. A friend of ours, someone who had sat at our dinner table, laughed at my jokes, brought wine to our housewarming party. The poison was closer than I could have imagined, I whispered. Pardon? Martin looked up. I shook my head. Nothing. Just realizing how blind I've been. Leaving Martin's office, I felt disoriented, as though the city streets had been rearranged during my meeting. In Christopher Nolan's Inception, reality became a multi-layered dream where each level was more distorted than the last. My marriage, it seemed, had operated on a similar principle. Each discovered betrayal revealing an even deeper level of deception beneath it. I drove to a park on the edge of town, finding a bench far from the playground where families gathered. I needed solitude, space to process this archaeological expedition into my past. Jake met me there an hour later, sitting silently beside me for several minutes before speaking. "Martin called me," he finally said. "Thought you shouldn't be alone." "Did he tell you?" "Just that there was new information." "Bad." I laughed, a sharp, broken sound that scared a nearby squirrel. "Bad doesn't begin to cover it. You remember Michael?" Jake's expression shifted. "Michael Peters? From your housewarming?" Apparently he warmed more than the house. The bitter joke felt foreign in my mouth, but the alternative was screaming. And he wasn't the only one. Jake swore softly. "How many?" "3 that we know of. So far." I rubbed my face. "Who knows how many more?" "What are you going to do with this information?" "Martin says we use it strategically. Not as a bomb but as a surgical strike." Jake nodded slowly. "Smart man, your lawyer." That evening, Catherine, Adam's wife, invited me for coffee. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our respective temporary shelters. "It's strange," she said, stirring her latte absently. "Meeting like this. Fellow members of a club no one wants to join." "The Betrayed Spouses Club?" I attempted a smile. "I keep thinking about how I'll tell this story years from now," she continued. "How I'll explain the day I discovered my husband's infidelity through a viral social media post." "I'm sorry about that," I said. "I wasn't thinking about how it would affect you." "Don't apologize." Her eyes, hazel and clear, met mine directly. "You did me a favor even if it was accidental. I needed to know the truth." We talked for nearly 2 hours, comparing notes like survivors of the same natural disaster, cataloging the damage and considering the rebuilding process. "Adam claims it was just Megan," she told me. "That she pursued him relentlessly." "And you believe that?" Catherine laughed softly. "About as much as you'd believe Megan if she told you the same thing about Adam." The next morning Martin called again. "Megan's attorney reached out within an hour of receiving our supplemental disclosure," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The speed of their response speaks volumes." "What are they offering?" "More favorable terms than we anticipated. They want this wrapped up quickly and quietly." I thought about the additional evidence sitting in a folder on Martin's desk. "And if we pushed harder?" "We could," Martin acknowledged. "But consider your endgame, Josh. Is it punishment or is it freedom to move forward?" It was a question I'd been wrestling with since the first discovery. Vengeance or closure? The satisfying sting of retribution or the quiet relief of conclusion? When I didn't answer immediately, Martin continued. "Sometimes winning isn't about inflicting maximum damage. Sometimes it's about walking away with what matters most." The call from Megan's attorney came less than an hour after Martin had forwarded the additional evidence. The timing itself was an admission, a white flag raised so quickly it betrayed the panic behind it. "They want to settle," Martin informed me, satisfaction coloring his typically measured tone. "Immediately and on terms significantly more favorable than their previous offer." "How favorable?" I asked, watching rain streak down the window of my new temporary apartment. I'd upgraded from the Blue Moon Motel 3 days earlier, seeking some semblance of normalcy in a space that wasn't charged by the night. "Let's just say they're no longer contesting any of our requests." Martin paused. "The speed of their response speaks volumes, Josh. They're in full damage control mode." That evening, Jake called with news from our mutual social circle. "It's like watching dominoes fall," he said. "One by one, people are distancing themselves from Megan." "I'm not celebrating that," I replied, though some vindicated part of me wanted to. "I'm not suggesting you should. I'm just reporting the shift." Jake hesitated. "She showed up at Diane's dinner party last night. The room apparently went silent when she walked in. She left after 15 minutes. I tried to picture it. Megan, always the center of any social gathering, facing a wall of awkward silence. The image should have brought satisfaction, but instead, I felt a complex tangle of emotions I couldn't immediately identify. "What about Adam?" I asked, changing the subject slightly. "His situation is worse. The company launched a formal investigation after Catherine filed a complaint with HR. Apparently, there were company funds involved in some of those Chicago trips." I winced. "That sounds like the end of his career." "Actions have consequences," Jake said simply. "His house of cards was bound to fall eventually." The metaphor stuck with me long after our call ended. Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher came to mind, a grand facade with a fatal crack running through its foundation, destined for spectacular collapse. 3 days later, I had a surreal encounter at the grocery store. Linda Chin, who worked with Megan, appeared beside me in the produce section. "Josh," she said, her voice low. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I focused on selecting an avocado, unsure how to respond. "I didn't know," Linda continued, fidgeting with her shopping list. "None of us knew what she was really like. She was so convincing, always playing the victim when she talked about your marriage. Sometimes the best actors aren't on stage but in everyday life," I replied, finally meeting her eyes. Linda nodded. "She's been put on administrative leave, you know. After what happened with Adam, the company is reviewing all her business trips." Later that week, Rachel, my PR contact, forwarded an image that had been circulating in local social media groups. Megan loading suitcases into her car outside her parents' suburban home. The queen of social media had become an exile, retreating to her childhood bedroom. I followed Adam's situation too, partly out of morbid curiosity and partly to understand the full ripple effect of our collapsed marriages. His professional fall had been swift and brutal. The man who had climbed the corporate ladder through charm and ambition now tumbled down it, undone by those same qualities when misdirected. "It's ironic," Catherine said during one of our now regular coffee meetings. "He always said he would do anything to reach the top. I guess he never considered that anything might include destroying everything he built." The final meeting with our respective attorneys took place in a sterile conference room downtown. Like poker players revealing their hands at the end of a game, we laid out the terms that would formally end 5 years of marriage. Megan attended with her lawyer, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges, dark circles poorly concealed beneath her eyes, hair not quite as perfectly styled as usual. She avoided my gaze throughout the proceedings, speaking only when directly addressed by her attorney. Signing the papers felt anticlimactic. Just a pen scratching across legal documents that translated emotional devastation into clinical terminology. As I added my signature to the final page, I felt not triumph but release, like a prisoner finally stepping into sunlight after years in darkness. Megan and her attorney left immediately after the documents were signed. As the door closed behind them, Martin placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. "It's over," he said simply. That evening, alone in my apartment, I received a final text message from Megan. "I hope you're happy now that you've ruined my life." I stared at the message for a long time, contemplating responses before ultimately deleting it unanswered. Albert Camus came to mind, his interpretation of the Sisyphus myth, finding meaning in the struggle itself. For years, I had pushed the boulder of our marriage uphill, believing in the purpose of my labor. Now the boulder had stopped rolling, and a different kind of meaning awaited discovery. The lock clicked with a satisfying finality as I turned the key in my new front door. After 3 months of temporary living, the motel, then the furnished apartment, I had finally found a house that felt right. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, and most importantly, no ghosts of my past life, no echoes of false laughter haunting the corners. Sunlight streamed through bare windows as I carried in the first box of belongings. The emptiness of the space felt cleansing rather than lonely, a blank canvas awaiting new memories, untainted by deception. "This is perfect for you," Jake said, hauling in a box marked kitchen, and setting it on the counter. "Enough room to spread out but not so much that it feels empty." "That's exactly what I thought," I replied, surprised at the genuine smile that came without effort. Those had been rare in recent months. Over the next few days, I settled into a rhythm of unpacking and arranging, finding therapeutic value in the simple decisions about where things should go. With each item I placed, each room I organized, I was building not just a home but a new version of myself, post-Megan, post-betrayal, but not defined by either. The process of sorting through possessions became an exercise in emotional archaeology, each object a relic from a time that now seemed to belong to someone else's life. I paused when I reached the box of photo albums. For weeks, I'd been avoiding this particular excavation, knowing the emotional toll it would take. Now, sitting cross-legged on my new living room floor, I opened the first album. Our honeymoon in Santorini stared back at me, Megan and I silhouetted against a spectacular sunset, arms wrapped around each other, smiles radiant with what I had believed was mutual happiness. "We're standing by the water looking so in love, or at least one of us was in love," I murmured to the empty room. Was this moment ever real? Or was it always just a masterfully directed scene? I continued through the albums, watching our relationship unfold in reverse chronology, holidays, vacations, dinner parties. Had there been signs I missed? Moments where her smile didn't quite reach her eyes? Times when her laughter held a note of performance rather than genuine joy? The questions exhausted me and I finally closed the albums, sliding them onto a high shelf in the spare bedroom closet. Not discarded but not central to my daily life either. Instead of dwelling on these artifacts of a fraudulent past, I began reclaiming pieces of myself that had been neglected during my marriage. I unearthed my vinyl collection, setting up my old record player in the living room corner. I rediscovered running, my feet pounding dawn-quiet streets as I built my endurance back. I returned to reading for pleasure, something that had gradually disappeared from my evenings without me noticing its absence. At my therapist's suggestion, I started keeping a journal, expelling the toxins of betrayal through my fingertips onto paper, translating pain into words that, once written, seemed to carry less weight inside me. "You look lighter," my colleague David remarked one day over lunch. "Not physically but like I've put down a backpack full of bricks I've been carrying for years?" I finished for him. "Exactly that." He nodded. "It suits you." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran across a news item in the local paper. A photograph of Megan at a charity fundraiser, smiling brilliantly for the camera as though nothing had happened. For a moment, old anger flared, but it subsided quickly, replaced by something closer to anthropological interest. I was studying a specimen of a life I no longer shared. The experience reminded me of The Truman Show. I had finally exited the elaborately constructed set and could now see the actors in their true light, recognize the artifice of what I had once accepted as reality. Catherine and I maintained our unusual friendship, checking in every few weeks by text or the occasional coffee. We weren't trauma-bonded, exactly, but we shared an understanding that few others could grasp. "I went on a date last night," she told me during one of our meetings. "First one since everything happened." "How was it?" "Terrifying." She laughed. "But also, nice. Normal." I didn't talk about Adam once. "That's progress," I said, genuinely happy for her. "What about you?" she asked. "Any interest in dating again?" I considered the question. "Not yet. I'm still getting reacquainted with myself. Figure I should know who I am now before I try to introduce that person to someone new." She nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. That was the gift of our peculiar friendship, the ability to recognize the landmarks in each other's journey without requiring elaborate directions. That evening, writing in my journal, I realized something that stopped my pen mid-sentence. I had gone the entire day without thinking about Megan until Catherine brought up dating. The woman who had once occupied the center of my thoughts had been relegated to the periphery, not through forced effort, but through the natural healing of time and distance. It wasn't forgetting. It was freedom. 1 year to the day after my divorce was finalized, I found myself standing on the beach where Megan and I had once taken anniversary photos. The same stretch of sand, the same rhythm of waves, but I viewed it through entirely different eyes. The water stretched toward the horizon, endless shades of blue melting into the sky. I breathed deeply, tasting salt on the air, feeling surprisingly at peace in a place that should have been haunted by memories. Instead, it felt reclaimed, no longer a landmark in the geography of a failed marriage but simply a beautiful beach on a clear autumn day. "Josh? Josh Wilson?" I turned at the sound of my name, surprised to see David Parker, a childhood friend I hadn't encountered in nearly a decade. "David, what are you doing here?" I embraced him, genuinely delighted by this unexpected connection to my past. "Moved back to the area 6 months ago," he explained, grinning. "The tech scene in Seattle was wearing me down. Wanted something closer to home." We spent the afternoon catching up, walking along the shore as the sunlight softened toward evening. There was something rejuvenating about reconnecting with someone who knew me before Megan, before the divorce. Someone who knew the core of who I was, untainted by recent history. "You seem good," David observed as we stopped to watch a group of pelicans dive bombing the water. "Last I heard through the grapevine, you were going through some rough stuff." "That's putting it mildly," I laughed. "But yeah, I am good. Better than I expected to be, honestly." "You still think about her?" he asked, the directness of old friendship bypassing social niceties. I considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. Not as a person so much as a lesson." "What lesson?" "That sometimes the most beautiful flowers can have the deepest roots of poison." I skipped a stone across the water. "And that surviving being poisoned makes you stronger, eventually." 2 weeks later, I began writing about my experience. Not as an act of revenge or catharsis, but as a beacon for others lost in the turbulent waters of betrayal and gaslighting. The words flowed with unexpected ease, as though they had been waiting for permission to emerge. "Mirrors of Lies," I called it, a memoir of deception and recovery, tracing the journey from blind trust through devastating discovery to eventual rebuilding. You should publish this, Jake said after reading the first 3 chapters. Seriously, Josh, this could help people. That's the idea, I replied. To turn all that pain into something useful. The writing process became a final stage of healing, not reopening wounds but examining the scars with clinical detachment, appreciating how they had mended, acknowledging their permanence without allowing them to define me. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I ducked into a bookstore to escape a sudden downpour, an echo of how I'd first met Megan that gave me pause, but didn't sting as I expected. The universe had a strange sense of humor, returning me to a bookstore during a storm at this juncture in my life. As I browsed the shelves, shaking water from my jacket, I nearly collided with a woman rounding the end of an aisle. "I'm so sorry," I began then stopped. "Catherine?" She looked as surprised as I felt. "Josh, what are you doing here?" "Escaping the rain." "You." "Poetry reading." She gestured toward the back of the store where chairs were arranged in semicircles. "Got here early to browse." The coincidence struck us both at the same moment. The strange symmetry of meeting Catherine in a bookstore during a storm, just as I had met Megan years before. We laughed, recognizing the irony. "Like 2 veterans of the same war meeting in peacetime," she said, echoing a comparison I'd made months earlier. We attended the poetry reading together, then continued to a nearby cafe. Our friendship had evolved naturally, not from the ashes of our former relationships but on entirely new ground, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than shared trauma. "I finished my book," I told her over coffee. "First draft anyway." "The memoir about everything that happened?" I nodded. "Just heard from a literary agent today. She wants to represent it." Catherine raised her cup in a toast. "To turning darkness into light." 3 months later, I received an unexpected text from Rachel, my PR contact who had become a friend. "Check your email." No. The message contained a photograph she'd taken at a charity gala, a crowded room of well-dressed attendees. In the far background, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, stood Megan, glass in hand, engaged in conversation. I studied the image, surprised by my own reaction. There was no pain, no anger, no lingering attachment, just the distant recognition one might feel seeing an old address on Google Maps. A place once intimately known, now belonging to a different chapter of life. That evening, I opened my email to find an offer from a publisher for my manuscript. As I read the enthusiastic message describing how my story could help others navigate similar experiences, I thought of the mountain climber who, having finally reached the summit, sees with perfect clarity not only the arduous path behind but the expansive view ahead. "Sometimes the darkest night leads to the brightest dawn," I whispered to myself, a line from the book's conclusion. Truth doesn't always bring freedom, but freedom always begins with truth. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the beach again, walking barefoot along the shore as the sun crested the horizon. This wasn't the path I had planned for my life, but standing there with the future unfolding before me like the endless ocean, I realized it might be exactly the path I needed.